Welcome, welcome. We are now kicking off our, I think, fifth workshop regarding student loans. And my name is Dr. Matthew Camp. I'm Director of Government Relations and Community Engagement at Teachers College, and so happy to convene another TC Take Action workshop around student loans. TC Take Action is Teachers College's nonprofit, nonpartisan initiative to explore pressing issues of the day that affect the TC communities, our students, our faculty, our staff, our alumni. And so we are digging into the issue of student loan forgiveness. And we, again, have done this, I think, 4 or 5 times over the past year or so. And the timing is critical right now because the Supreme Court, as you know, just made a major decision around this issue. And lots of TC alumni, myself included, as a proud alum, have gone through the long and often arduous journey of student loan forgiveness and have lots of questions. So to help us answer those questions, we're so happy to have the Student Borrower Protection Center joining us as a wonderful, trusted partner on this work. And Amy Salata will help kick things off from SBPC. And Amy has, again, done this multiple times as an expert on this issue. And her colleague, Ella, will be fielding questions. In the registration, we did have an opportunity to submit your questions. And Lauren, if you don't mind, I'm joined by our colleagues, Lauren Duncan. Hi, Lauren. And Steph Caballero from the Alumni Experience Office at Teachers College. Lauren will be dropping the question form in the chat. And as Amy is presenting their material, please add your questions in the chat, and we'll try and field those as well. We have too many people to do live Q&A, but the chat is a decent way of fielding those questions. So without further ado, I will hand it off to Amy. Thank you so much, Amy, for joining us.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for having me. We're super grateful to Columbia Teachers College for having us today. We're going to be talking about some of the different federal programs in addition to the Supreme Court decision that just came down. First, I'm going to share my screen. I'm with the Student Borrower Protection Center along with my colleague Ella here today. The Student Borrower Protection Center, we are a national nonprofit policy organization focused solely on alleviating the burden of student debt for people all over the country. We do this through a mixture of advocacy, policy making, and litigation to rein in industry abuses, protect borrowers' rights, and advance economic opportunity for the next generation of students. I'm really excited to be with you all today. As Dr. Camp mentioned, please put your questions in the chat, and Ella will be collecting them throughout the presentation, and we'll get to as many as we can at the end. I think with that, we'll get started. So let's see, let's go over an agenda for what we're going to be talking about today. So first, we're going to be talking about the Supreme Court decision, which I'm sure is top of folks' minds since it just came out a few weeks ago. And some updates to what it might mean for debt relief. In addition, there are some other federal programs we're going to talk about today and ways to get on track for other types of debt cancellation. But certainly, if your questions are outside of the scope of these things, please ask them and we'll try to get to them. And if we don't know the answer, then we'll figure out the answer for you. So let's get started. So first, we'll talk about the Supreme Court decision that came down just about less than a month ago. So as you'll remember, President Biden announced last August that there would be a debt relief program that would provide up to $20,000 in debt relief for those that used a Pell Grant at any point in their educational career, and then $10,000 for all of their federal borrowers. There were income caps to this. There was an application period that was live for a few weeks in the fall. During this time, during that brief window of time, which was about 8 to 12 weeks that the application was live, 26 million people applied. That is so many people, right? That really speaks to the popularity and the necessity of a program like this. And during that time, 16 million people were already processed. So they have been waiting in the queue. They said that they were approved, and they had just been kind of waiting for debt relief to happen. As you may already know, in mid-November, this was blocked by a federal judge in Texas and also a panel of judges in Missouri. And the case was heard in February, and then in late June, the Supreme Court struck down the debt relief program in a 6-3 decision, stating that this particular plan was impermissible under the HEROES Act. So what this means is, and you may have already heard, that same day, President Biden announced a new plan that he would be pursuing debt relief under the Higher Education Act, which is a different authority for canceling student debt. This method will take longer. It will take, a few months. It could take longer than that because it has to go through a negotiated rulemaking process. The negotiated rulemaking process is one where they have different advocates, different, constituents from, different kind of entities talk about, what this means and what it could look like. And so that's why it might take longer. It's currently open and accepting public comments. And so you can go to the Federal Register today. I think we're going to pop a link in the chat if it's not already there. And you can tell the Department of Education that debt relief is important to you and why. It's really important that we get as many comments as possible because we want to demonstrate that this is needed, right? This is popular. 26 million people applied. They're ready for it and they need it. In addition, there is some draft language from one of our partners, the Student Debt Crisis Center. And so we can share that link as well if you need help kind of drafting a comment, but it's really easy, takes a few minutes. It would be great to get your comments in to tell the Biden administration and the Department of Education that we need this and that we want this. So while we're awaiting what this program might look like and the parameters of it, there are some other ways to get your debt canceled, which we're going to review today because it might help a lot of you kind of sort through what your options might be. So let's get to it. All right. So the first thing I want to mention or talk about is the income-driven repayment account adjustment. So IDR stands for income-driven repayment plans. These plans are often more affordable for folks because they're pegged to your income and not necessarily to the whole loan balance. And so, each month folks are paying, maybe a smaller amount than they would under the standard 10-year plan. There are 4 plans that fall into this bucket under IDR. They're income-based repayment or IBR, income contingent repayment or ICR, pay, which is an acronym for pay as you earn, and then repay, which is revised pay as you earn. Now, under these plans, it's great because you have lower monthly payments, but it can also be really distressing for folks because they're doing everything right. They're making monthly payments, but they're logging into their accounts and seeing that their balance is continuing to balloon because maybe their payments aren't touching all of the interest. Maybe they're not even touching the principal. And so it can be really distressing for folks, enrolled in these plans. So to rectify this, the Department of Education made it so that after 20 or 25 years in these income-driven repayment plans, you can get your debt canceled. It's 20 years if you only have undergraduate debt, and it's 25 years if you have a combination of undergraduate and graduate debt. However, a Government Accountability Office report last year and an accompanying NPR story found that fewer than 200 people out of a potential universe of 4 million people have ever received cancellation under these IDR plans, which is an absolutely abysmal rate, right? It tells us that something in this program is not working. It's very clearly not working. They found that servicers, the student loan servicers, the companies that are managing your student loans for the federal government and contracted by the federal government, they have been routinely steering people into forbearance and deferment instead of offering income-driven repayment plans that might have given people a way to stay in repayment for a more affordable amount. And they also have no idea how close people are to that 20 or 25-year mark that would offer them cancellation. And so because of this history, the Department of Education announced something called the IDR account adjustment. Basically what this means is that they're going to go through everyone's account, everyone's federal account, and do a one-time audit of all accounts. They're basically going to count any time that you've spent in repayment. And this is regardless of whether or not you've been on an income-driven repayment plan or not, because of that issue with the forbearance steering and the deferment steering. They're going to count anytime at all, basically, except for in-school deferment or for time that you've spent in default. In-school deferment is when you're back in school, your loans are automatically placed into this status. and it is not technically a repayment status. It's called in-school deferment, and it's coded differently than other deferments. So they won't be counting that time, but they will be counting some forbearances as outlined here, and then some other deferments if you had a deferment prior to the year 2013. And you're also going to keep any credit that you've gained before you consolidate, if you need to consolidate, which I'll get into a moment. If you have commercial FFEL loans, you need to consolidate in order to access this IDR account adjustment. For most folks, this is going to be completely automatic, but if you have those commercial FFEL loans or those federal family education loans, you'll need to consolidate in order to take part in this IDR account adjustment. And one of the really nice things about the IDR account adjustment is that all this credit that you get is also eligible for PSLF credit, as long as you fill out PSLF forms, which we'll get to in a little bit. So that's one of the really nice things about the IDR account adjustment too, is that it counts for PSLF. So you might be thinking, how do I know if I need to consolidate? A great way to tell is by logging into studentaid.gov. You can go there and look at your dashboard. And I'll get to a picture of the dashboard in a moment, but you could also download your aid data once you get into studentaid.gov. If you don't remember your password, you can reset it. This is going to be your clearinghouse for most information, and it's a really great resource. So I'd recommend logging in. You could even do it right now while you're on this call to get a sense of what it looks like. And then this is what your dashboard is going to look like once you get there. So we're talking about these federal family education loans, and you'll see the dashboard. It lists the type of loans that you have. You can tell that this person only has direct consolidation loans because that's the loan type next to the ones with the balance. You only need to worry about the ones with the balance because they're the ones you're looking to get canceled. And then that they previously had these other types of loans like Graduate Plus loans, Perkins loans. And so if you have a federal family education loan that is not owned or serviced by the federal government, then you need to consolidate. So what that looks like is this. In this second block, of the second blue block in the middle of the page, it says Wells Fargo Bank is the loan servicer, or the one servicing those loans. And so that's how you can tell that that is a commercially serviced loan, FFEL loan. The last block says Department of Education / MOHELA, which means that it's owned directly by the Department of Education. Another really easy way to tell if you have a commercially serviced or a commercially held FFEL loan, or if you have one that's held by the Department of Education, if you've been experiencing the payment pause for the past 3.5 years, then you have a FFEL loan that is held by the Department of Education. If you have one that has not been on a payment pause, that's how you know that you're in you have a commercial FFEL loan and you'll need to consolidate in order to access the IDR account adjustment. I'm happy to answer more questions about this at the end. I know that this is very confusing information. So yeah, happy to answer more. All right, so let's just review the steps that you need to take if you want to get this IDR credit. So first, log into studentaid.gov, tell what type of loans you have. If you don't have those loans that are held by the Department of Education, you'll need to consolidate them before December 31st of 2023. That's the deadline to consolidate in order to take part in this. The Department of Education will begin making adjustments for those that have been in repayment the longest. So those that are past that threshold of 20 or 25 years. And then all other borrowers' accounts will be adjusted next year after this consolidation deadline because they need time to process it. If you all heard, last week, President Biden announced that he was canceling $39 billion in student loans for over 800,000 people. This was part of the IDR account adjustment. So this is that first round of the IDR account adjustment taking place, getting people cancellation. That is their right under these income-driven repayment plans. And so, we can already see that this is taking place and working, which is really exciting because it's going to get a lot of folks past that threshold or really, closer to that threshold of cancellation. That is their right under those plans. So next, we're going to talk a little bit about the Public Service Loan Forgiveness Program and how it interacts with the IDR account adjustment to get folks past credit towards PSLF. As you may know, the Public Service Loan Forgiveness Program was enacted in 2007 by Congress, to help people with their student loans, but then also, to make sure that people weren't deterred from entering the public service because of their student loan balances. And to put it very simply, PSLF is the promise that if a borrower works in public service for 10 years and makes payments on their loans during that time, the remainder of their debt will be, canceled under PSLF. So the basic outlines of the program are this. So there are typically 4 requirements. The first is that you have to have a direct loan. That's one of several federal loan types. Direct loans have been the main federal loan type since 2010. So I mentioned those older FFELP, or those federal family education loans. Those predated direct loans. So basically, if you went to school after 2010, you probably have a direct loan. And if you went to school before 2010, you might have a FFELP loan. You might also have Perkins loans. But if you don't have a direct loan, you could make your loans eligible by consolidating to get a direct loan for public service loan forgiveness. Again, that's where, logging into studentaid.gov and figuring out what type of loans you have and what you need to do to access some of these programs is a good idea. The second requirement for PSLF is that you need to be in the right type of repayment plan, which for the program is generally an income-driven repayment plan. So one of those 4 plans that I mentioned under the last section. So I'll just say them again to reiterate them. So it's income-based repayment, or IBR, income contingent repayment, or ICR, pay, which is PAYE, or repay, which is REPAYE. You may have heard that the president also announced a new income-driven repayment plan that is being rolled out kind of gradually. That plan is called SAVE. So that will also fall into this bucket, and it'll basically take over, or kind of, it'll basically take over the repay program. So that is something to look out for. So those 4 plans are the ones that are eligible for under IDR. And then the third requirement is that you need to be in the right type of employment, which for the program is a public service entity. That's any level of government. So that could be federal, state, local, or tribal governments, any 501c3 nonprofit, and then certain other nonprofits also qualify for public service loan forgiveness. Something that often falls into this category is something like emergency services. You might not be like coded as a 501c3 nonprofit. You might not be directly employed by a state or city, but because you're a firefighter or you're an EMT working for the public service, that also falls under that category most often. And you need to work full time, which is defined as 30 hours a week. Fourth, you need to make 120 payments, which is 10 years worth of payments. And you need to make those payments on a direct loan while enrolled in an income-driven repayment plan, while also working full-time for a public service entity. So these 4, requirements are kind of non-negotiable and all work together. Now, I mentioned, so some really good news is that any months that you've been receiving the payment pause, so you haven't been required to make payments, if you have federal loans that are held by the government, you haven't been required to make payments for the past 3.5 years or so. All this time counts towards public service loan forgiveness. You still need to meet the other criteria, and the most relevant is that you need to have been working for a public service entity for the past 3.5 years. But that's a lot of free credit towards PSLF. So this is a huge lifesaver for folks who haven't had to make payments during this time. Now I want to talk a little bit about how PSLF and the IDR account adjustment interact. Essentially, this moment in time is allowing you to get that retroactive credit towards public service loan forgiveness, and they're kind of waiving these first 2 criteria. So if you didn't previously have a direct loan, now is the time to rectify that, to consolidate. And then also, if you haven't been on an income-driven repayment plan, now is a great time to get on an income-driven repayment plan in order to continue accruing credit towards PSLF in the future. And then, like the IDR account adjustment, the deadline to consolidate is December 31st again. So if you don't have direct loans, you need to consolidate in order to get direct loans to become eligible for PSLF. And that deadline again is December 31st. And in addition, the other step that you would need to take is to file PSLF forms for any public service employment that you've had since October 1st of 2007, if you haven't already. So we recommend filing PSLF forms every year, once a year, and then anytime you change public service employers, You don't have to do this. You could document everything after 10 years of employment. But this is a great way to catch any mistakes that are made and deal with them in real time, because we know that historically there have been major issues with the public service loan forgiveness program that the Department of Education has continued to kind of rectify through something called the PSLF waiver, if you were familiar with that from last year. But then also through this IDR account adjustment, they're trying to fix these historical issues so that it works moving forward. If you need to file a public service loan forgiveness form, you can do that at the PSLF help tool at studentaid.gov. And yeah, there is no deadline for the PSLF form to be filed. You can do that at any time. Really, the key is consolidating before December 31st in order to have a direct loan. So one note is that Parent Plus borrowers are now included. They're able to get retroactive credit towards PSLF through this IDR account adjustment. Parent Plus borrowers are borrowers who take out loans on behalf of their children's education. And they were excluded from the PSLF waiver. But at the end of last year, the Department of Education announced that they can now get PSLF credit through the IDR account adjustment, which is, it's a result of a lot of hardworking advocates pushing for that. So the action items that they would need to take in order to get this PSLF credit to be retroactive are to submit PSLF forms for any past employment that they've had since October 1st, 2007. And then you could also consider consolidating to get on an income-driven repayment plan. I say consider consolidating because since we've been on a payment pause, there are 3.5 years where you maybe haven't had to make payments during that time. And so for some borrowers, particularly Parent Plus borrowers, the standard plan might be more affordable than the income-driven repayment plans for Parent Plus borrowers. And so what you'll want to do is you'll want to use the loan simulator tool, or the repayment calculator tool available at studentaid.gov. You could punch in your data, like how much you owe, that sort of thing, and figure out which one might be more affordable for you. For some borrowers, it might be the standard plan. For others, it might be an income-driven repayment plan. So that's just a consideration if you are a Parent Plus borrower. Now, not to beat a dead horse, but yes, December 31st is the deadline to apply, to consolidate if you are seeking PSLF credit through the IDR account adjustment. And of course, it's the same deadline if you want that IDR credit through the IDR account adjustment. And then just to reiterate the steps here. So remember to log into studentaid.gov, figure out what type of loans you have. If you don't have direct loans, you'll need to consolidate before the end of the year in order to get this retroactive PSLF credit. If you have Parent Plus loans, you could consider consolidating to get on an income-driven repayment plan. And then remember to submit your PSLF forms for any public service work that you've had since October 1st of 2007. I also just want to mention here a couple of new things that have happened just this month in July. There are new regulations that went into effect on July 1st that might affect some of you on the call. So the first is that before, PSLF was, the statute said that, you had to work full time, which was defined as 30 hours a week, or whatever your employer deemed as full time if it was greater. And so that caused a lot of confusion on employers weren't signing forms because of this. And so they made it standard that it's now 30 hours a week, which is a lifeline to a lot of folks. Another great thing that happened with the new regulations that went into effect in July are that you no longer have to be working when you receive public service loan forgiveness. So now you're able to, you have to be working at the time that you submit your PSLF forms, but you don't have to be working at the time that you receive PSLF. And so, a lot of folks were delaying retirement and, to await their application status. So now you just have to be working at the time that you submit your application, but not when you actually receive PSLF. And then one last thing that changed is that, this 30-hour requirement really negatively affected a lot of adjuncts and contingent faculty who maybe only spend 10 hours in the classroom, but that doesn't count all the time that they spend outside of that, prepping lessons, grading paperwork. So the Department of Education has stated that those folks can use a multiplier of 3.35 to their hours in order to get them over that threshold of 30 hours. And so, you know, this is great news for a lot of contingent faculty who had this problem in the past. So just want to mention that in case it's useful for folks on the call who might fall into these categories or benefit from some of these things. Okay, next we're going to talk a little bit about a program called Fresh Start. This is an initiative for defaulted borrowers. So typically, if you're in default, you know, it affects your credit. There are about 7 million defaulted borrowers across the country. And if you're in default, you know, you usually have two options to get out of default. One is to consolidate, and the other is to rehabilitate. Rehabilitation is a pretty onerous process. It takes about 10 months. There's a monitoring period to make sure that you can make your payments. And so this Fresh Start initiative is really meant to be an easier way out of default and a quicker way out of default. So it immediately restores all of your repayment options, including the income-driven repayment plans, which if you, you know, you could be eligible for a $0 payment a month if you make very low income. And then it immediately restores your ability to go back to school. So you could get that Title IV aid and go back to school. If you rehabilitated during the payment pause, you're also able to restore that rehabilitation option if you used it in the last 3.5 years. It, you know, restores your credit, and it saves borrowers from involuntary collections that they might be a part of. These are the loans that are eligible for Fresh Start. And I just want to mention here that they have to have defaulted prior to March 13th of 2020. Because of Department of Education guidance, no one should have been defaulting after this date, but certainly after the payment pause ends, and if you go into default, you know, those loans will not be eligible for Fresh Start. It's just these loans that were in default prior to March 13th of 2020. And then this is a smaller slice of the pie, but want to mention the ineligible defaulted loans in case anyone has any of these loans, and you know, they would be ineligible for Fresh Start. Now, like a lot of these things, this isn't completely automatic. So there is a 1-year timeline. So after the payment pause ends, borrowers have 1 year to do one of two things in order to get back on track through Fresh Start. One is you could communicate with the Default Resolution Group, or DRG, or their guarantee agency to request to enter a repayment plan again. Or you could also request aid at an eligible school. If you choose the latter option, the school will just need a signed statement from you saying that you agree to go back into a repayment plan. So those are your two options, and you have a year to do them. If you don't do one of the above, you'll be placed back into default using the original date of delinquency. So there's a huge incentive to get on track and participate in Fresh Start to you know, get out of default this year or within the next year. Okay, finally, this is our last topic for today. We'll just go over a couple things to help you prepare for a return to repayment. So as I'm sure you know, the payment pause is set to be to end after August 30th of this year. In September, interest will start accruing on accounts, and in October, payments will be due. You should receive a bill for those payments that are due in October, 21 days before the bill is due. In the meantime, you know, you could update your contact information on studentaid.gov or with your servicer. Another thing I want to mention is that until the end of August, you can request a refund for any payments that you made during the payment pause. This is really useful for folks who are maybe seeking PSLF. You know, maybe you're hoping to get your debt canceled through PSLF anyway. And so if you made any voluntary payments during the payment pause, you can get that money back into your pocket by requesting a refund from your servicer. Remember that if you're on an income-driven repayment plan, you'll need to recertify your income every year. You know, you need to submit paperwork saying, this is my income and this is what my monthly payment should be. They are still accepting verbal, you know, recertifications over the phone for right now, but remember to continue to enroll in and recertify your income every year. Finally, if you had auto-debited payments being made from your account directly, those should not be continuing. So the Department of Education has said that no one will be automatically enrolled in auto debited payments. And so if that's something you're interested in, you need to proactively enroll in that. And I also mentioned this, to make sure there's a lot moving right now. So if you are getting payments auto debited, that's a problem. And so be sure to contact your servicer or contact some of the resources that we're going to share in a moment, to make sure that that's not happening. Okay, so we're going to get to some important takeaways and then we'll get to all your questions. Thanks so much for your patience today. Okay, so first, check what type of loans you have by logging into studentaid.gov. Remember that if you have those commercially held FFELP loans, you'll need to consolidate by December 31st to participate in the IDR account adjustment. And if you don't have direct loans, you'll also need to consolidate to get that PSLF credit that's retroactive. And the same deadline applies, the end of the year. If you are seeking PSLF, be sure to fill out your PSLF forms. A reminder that you can submit them every year or every time you change jobs to make sure that you're catching any mistakes that are made. And then if you are in default and you're looking to get out of default through Fresh Start, remember that you can request a repayment plan from the default resolution group or your guarantee agency, or you could request aid at an eligible school. And you have 1 year to do that. So 1 year after the payment pause ends would be next September or next August. So that's the deadline to participate in Fresh Start. As you can tell from this presentation, and this is only a slice of what's happening in the student loan world right now, there's a lot happening and there are a lot of people that are going to be looking to make money off of that. So please be aware of scams. Make sure that you're always getting information from a great, trusted source like studentaid.gov. We also have a resource called cancelmystudentdebt.org. And that has kind of how-to guides on how to submit your PSLF forms, participate in IDR account adjustment. It has FAQs. So just make sure that you're getting something from a trusted source, and no one, the government, the Department of Education will always contact you via email. So no one will be calling you asking for money in order to get your debt canceled. And then finally, please, if you experience any issues, file complaints. You can complain to the Federal Student Aid Ombudsperson within the Department of Education. You could also complain to some states have ombudspersons at the state level. We keep a list of those on cancelmystudentdebt.org. And then you could also complain to the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau. These complaints are super important in fixing the programs that exist that aren't working for folks. The more complaints they receive about a given topic, the more likely they are to respond to something. And then in addition, those complaints are used to shape policy of the future. So I can't, recommend complaining enough if you are experiencing issues. All right, so now I think that we are going to go to Q&A. Thanks so much for your attention. And I'll kick it over to Ella to share some questions.
Yes, there were a bunch. So I will do my best to consolidate the similar ones. And I'm sure Amy will do her best to get through them quickly. So here we go. A couple of questions about how do we know if our job counts as public service, then folks asking, does working for a college count? What about private school teachers? What if you work for a small business contractor for the federal government? So how do you know if your job qualifies?
That's great. So, at the top, I guess I would say any level of government or any 501c3 nonprofit. So that includes federal, state, local, or tribal governments, any 501c3 nonprofit. So you could look at your tax status as an organization to figure out if you qualify. And then also those certain other nonprofits I mentioned that often do things like emergency services also qualify. You can figure this out by going to the PSLF help tool at studentaid.gov. The first step in the help tool is basically a database where you could punch in your employer identification number, figure out if you qualify or not. It'll pop up, that you either do or don't. I want to mention here too that database is not necessarily exhaustive. So it's possible that you work for a nonprofit that no one has ever applied for PSLF before. So it's, if your organization doesn't pop up when you run the name or the EIN through the database, it could just mean that no one else has ever applied from that organization before, and that's why it's not popping up. But if you know that you're a 501c3 nonprofit, you qualify, and so you can still submit forms for PSLF. Of the things that you mentioned, Ella, that people asked about, like colleges, private colleges, they likely all, as long as they're not nonprofits, they all qualify. Or if they're, incorporated into the school district and working for like an arm of the government, they qualify. The only one that kind of seemed like it didn't qualify would be a contractor working for the federal government. So those that, that are private businesses contracted by the federal government or by a government would not qualify, which I understand is frustrating, but that's the reality of the statute as it stands right now.
Thanks, Amy. And sorry, I'm just trying to keep up as there are more questions being asked still. Okay, someone asked about teacher loan forgiveness, but the question exactly wasn't clear. So if you still have an outstanding question about teacher loan forgiveness, if you could provide clarity in the chat, just what your question was about. And then so a couple of questions about if you work for an eligible organization but haven't yet filled out a PSLF form, can you fill it out and backdate it to count the work you've done since being hired for that org? And a very similar question, does retroactive public service count, or do you have to work in public service moving forward?
These are great questions. So this is one of the reasons that the IDR account adjustment exists. It's one of the reasons that they implemented a waiver for folks. The acceptance rate for PSLF was so bad. It was 2% out of all the people that applied were getting PSLF once the 10-year mark of the program came about in 2017. That's why they are fixing the program as we speak right now. And so right now, in this moment in time, yes, you can get retroactive credit towards PSLF. Yes, if you work for a public service entity right now, and you worked for one, like basically any public service work that you've done since October 1st of 2007 qualifies for PSLF. And so you'll have as many PSLF forms as you've had employers over that time. And so you'll just need your employer to verify that you worked there for that amount of time, that you did it for at least 30 hours a week. And that is how you get them to certify your employment.
And Amy, and you had to have been making those payments in during the time, right?
Correct. You had to have been making payments during that time. However, because of this IDR account adjustment, they count certain forbearances. They'll count deferments prior to the year 2013, since we know that this was a very common issue that folks are experiencing from their servicers. And so if there are periods of time that you weren't making payments because maybe you were in a forbearance, some of those will automatically be counted through the IDR account adjustment. And if there are other ones that don't get counted, you could contact the Federal Student Aid Ombudsperson and ask for a review of your account once this happens, like in 2024, after this program kind of is processed. If you think that there's time that you didn't get counted that you think should be counted, you could have a review of your account done to see if you can get extra time to count as well.
That answers the very next question, which was, do we need to apply for the IDR account adjustment, or will that occur automatically? So I feel like you answered that. So we'll just, go ahead.
Just one note, because it doesn't hurt to remind folks. So it is mostly automatic for people. However, if you have those commercially held FFELP loans, you'll need to consolidate in order to take part in this. So it's really important that you go to studentaid.gov, figure out what type of loans you have, and consolidate if you need to. Thanks, Ellen. Sorry.
No, all good. Thanks, Amy. Okay, so we have another two similar questions. One, is there any language for people going on medical disability and PSLF? And the other is someone asking, do I get a break if I am legally blind? So if you can provide any clarity on perhaps TPD here.
Sure. So I think like the medical disability question, I'm not quite certain of, like if you're taking time off for a particular medical disability, I think it might be time that counts under PSLF. I'm not sure if you know this, Ella, but I think it might be time that counts under PSLF because you're still considered a full-time employee of that organization. However, it's a good chance to mention that there is another program called Total and Permanent Disability, and you are able to get all of your debt canceled through that program. It's the parameters of it are rather stringent, so it's not something that that we talk about too often. You know, you have to be able to prove that you know, your disability precludes you from working. And so if you, you know, have something like a letter from the VA, or if you're able to get a doctor's note that proves that you're unable to work because of your disability, that's one way that you can get your discharge through that program. And so it's a less common program. But again, for that first person that mentioned medical disability, I have a feeling that they still might qualify for PSLF because they're still full-time employees of the organization. If that's in fact the case. You know, I obviously don't have all the information, but just want to mention that TPD program as well, if that's of interest to folks too. Thanks, Ella.
Thanks, Amy. And yeah, that would have been my take as well. Okay, so moving on to the next question here. We have a couple of questions about IDR. How do I sign up for IDR? And some, I guess, there was a question about different like repayment plans. So, but I don't know if there's anything else you wanted to say about IDR. Yeah, sure.
So yeah, again, those 4 income-driven repayment plans are IBR, ICR, Pay, and Repay. To enroll in a plan, you just need to call your servicer and ask to be put in one of those plans. There is that repayment calculator tool that I mentioned at studentaid.gov. That's going to tell you, you know, how much money that you'll have to pay each month, you know, on these different plans based, you know, these plans are all different. And so they might, you know, some calculate your income with your spouse's income if you're married, some don't. And like some are a different percentage of discretionary income for folks. And so I'd really highly recommend looking at that repayment calculator tool to see which plan is best for you, which plan is most affordable. And then you can contact your servicer to be put on one of those plans. Did I miss a piece of that question, Ella? Okay.
No, that was great. Thanks. We have a question. If you request a refund for payments after March 13th, 2020, would they still count towards PSLF? And is the refund taxable?
Okay, this is a great question.
And similarly, just one more part. Someone else asked, can you request the refund after forgiveness is granted? So after you get PSLF?
Okay, this is a great question. So again, you can request any refunds since March 13th of 2020, when the payment pause began. You can only request a refund and you can only receive the refund. So I mentioned that because if your employer, you know, pays for some of your student loans, you're able to request a refund for that money as well, and get that money in your pocket because they can only be paid back to you. I believe this will be suspended at the end of August. And so if you want to request a refund for any of those payments that were made during the pandemic, you'll need to do that before the end of August. The refunds, I don't believe are taxable. I think that's right, Ella, please correct me if I'm wrong. And we can follow up on this as well. I don't believe they're taxable. And yeah, because any debt cancellation that goes through between now and 2025 is not taxable at the federal level. And then certain states may include it as taxable income, but it depends on your state. And we can verify this, but I'm pretty certain that that is the correct answer.
Thanks, Amy. Okay, so someone asked, is there a list of trusted resources or professionals who can help individually assist borrowers?
So we don't currently recommend any organizations or companies that are doing this work. We do have cancelmystudentdebts.org, which is the resource that I shared during the presentation. There's also, you may qualify for legal aid in your state, depending on which state you're in. And so it would be great we can share these resources afterwards as well, but the National Consumer Law Center has a great borrower assistance page that includes some of those legal aids that might be able to help you. In addition, if you are in a state that has an ombudsperson at the state level, that person might be able to help you as well. And so those are a couple of options. I understand that that's maybe not exactly what you're looking for, but those are some of the options that we would recommend looking into.
Thanks, Amy. And then someone asks, this is, I think, just more information about the SAVE plan, but someone asks, are interest rates going to 0% soon because of the SAVE plan?
So they are rolling it out gradually. The SAFE plan itself, and part of that SAFE plan is that interest will be paid off by the federal government as it accrues. I'm not certain if that is going into effect this year or next. I'm not sure if you remember, Ella.
Sorry, what was the question?
Just about interest being paid off. Is that part of the SAFE plan going into effect this year or next year? Do you remember?
Oh gosh, I don't remember, but I can drop the I find the education department's page on Save to be really user friendly and really informative. So I'll drop that if that's helpful.
That'd be great. Thank you, Ella. Whenever you get a chance. And we can also share a bunch of resources afterwards as well, we'll share them with Dr. Camp.
Well, sorry, there's still a bunch more questions, so I'm just trying to go through the remaining ones and do my best to consolidate. Okay. I think you already touched on this, Amy. Someone asking about they graduated in 2020, never made payments. Do your years of employment during the pandemic payment pause count towards PSLF? Which I think you answered is yes.
Correct. Yep. That's correct. I also see another, just to help you out, I see another question in here about refunds for making over 120 PSLF payments. So if you have made over 120 PSLF payments on a direct loan, yes, you are eligible for a refund. However, if you made over 120 payments on a consolidated loan, you won't, or I'm sorry, not a consolidated loan, on one of those older loans that I mentioned, like a FFELP loan, you're not eligible for a refund. So the question of whether or not you have direct loans kind of comes into play here.
Someone asks, I am a doctoral student. This is my 4th year. Do I begin making payments on this year? Or do I wait until I complete my degree? And they've already been working as a teacher for the city of New York. Yeah.
That's a great question. So when you are in school, your loans are automatically placed into something called in-school deferment. It was one of those categories that I mentioned that doesn't count towards the IDR account adjustment. If you are in school and you want to be taken out of in-school deferment, because that time doesn't count for PSLF if you're not making payments, you can call your servicer and request to be taken out of in-school deferment so that you would start making payments. And then that time would continue to accrue for PSLF, and maybe if maybe it would be quite affordable for you if you're able to kind of work and go to school at the same time and make payments. This is a question for folks. So the answer is I think I'm not sure. You'd have to look into studentaid.gov and figure out when your graduation date, when your graduation date is, and when your grace period starts. The grace period is like 6 months after graduation, where you don't have to make payments yet. One other thing that I want to mention on in-school deferment is that if you were automatically placed in in-school deferment, there will be an option to get some of that time back. You'll be able to buy that time back. But there are parameters around it. It's not yet set in stone what it'll look like. There'll be an application process for it. So I just want to mention that, if you went back to school, you were working full time, maybe you were getting your master's while you were working, and you want to buy back that time for the purposes of PSLF, there will be an option to do that. It doesn't exist yet. And the parameters around it aren't quite clear just yet, but I want to mention it in case it's helpful for folks on the call that's coming down the pike.
Thanks, Amy. And just flagging, there's a couple of folks who are asking advice type questions. And for these ones, what is my lowest possible monthly payment for this amount? And if I anticipate paying my loans off in less than 120 payments, should I do it? For these kinds of things, I will plug again what Amy said, which is cancelmystudentdebt.org has some fantastic resources. And I don't know if you had anything to add there on that, Amy, otherwise I'll get to more questions. But
I think just to mention that, we're not able to give legal advice. So if your question is hyper specific, we won't be able to answer it because there's so many different, so many different instances for folks. And so we don't want to give you bad advice either. So yeah, if your question is hyper specific, we're only able to give kind of general program information, but we find that most of that will answer your questions. But yes, highlight the resource Ella mentioned, cancelmystudentdebt.org.
Totally. And again, as Amy mentioned, if you go to studentaid.gov, they have payment calculators that you can look on different income-driven repayment plans, what your monthly payment would be for your specific circumstances. Okay, other questions? Sorry, there's a bunch that are kind of very specific to.
No, that's
Someone asks, can you explain the SAVE plan more? For which I can drop that link.
That would be great. Thank you.
Yes. Actually, sorry, that's not even the best link. They have a couple of different resources up.
Here's one that might be good for the teachers college folks to answer if you're able to. Someone is asking for the specific PSLF employer electronic signature address for TC.
Yeah, I think you email that to HR at Teachers College. If you're a staff member, right, Katie, thanks for dropping that in there. If there are other TC staff on the call who might know from a student perspective, if that's also the case, or an alumni perspective, please chime in. And if we don't have an answer, we'll follow up with you. And just to share again, all this recording will be shared with everyone who registers, and there'll be more opportunities to keep asking. But I think that answers the question for now.
Thank you so much.
We have another question for someone asking, they have multiple loans through the federal government. They're wondering if they need to make different payments for each of their loans through their servicer, or do they make one payment and the servicer handles that?
This is a great question. So if you have multiple loans, and it's possible, I think, that you could have multiple servicers for each of those loans. This might be one of the benefits of consolidating. So one thing that happens when you consolidate as well is that all the loans are put on the same timeline. And so say you have some loans from your undergraduate degree, and then you have some loans from your graduate degree. One of the benefits of consolidating is that all those loans would be on the timeline of the oldest loan. And so that could get you extra time towards PSLF, especially if you worked in between undergraduate and graduate school. So that speaks to kind of some of the differences in the loans there. I think it just depends whether or not you have different servicers servicing those loans, or different payments that you have to make. That's where studentaid.gov comes in, because that is going to be at that website. You're going to be able to see your whole dashboard, all the loans that you owe, the amounts of those loans, the interest rates of those loans, and then who services each of those loans. And so, but for someone like that, it might be beneficial to consolidate so that you have them all on the same timeline and just serviced by one company.
Thanks, Amy. We have a question about about Parent Plus loans. What does repayment look like for Parent Plus loans?
I don't know. I mean, I'm not sure exactly what this question means.
I know it's kind of vague, but I guess maybe could you talk about the ways in which Parent Plus loans are different or handled differently, or in some ways what they might be excluded from, for example?
Yeah, sure. That's a great point, Ella. Yeah, so Parent Plus loans, again, are those loans that you take out for your children's education. Of their own nature, they are direct loans, and so they do qualify for public service loan forgiveness. Like a Parent Plus loan is a direct loan. And however, they are excluded from some things, namely is that they are only eligible for the income contingent repayment plan under the IDR plans. This ICR plan is the least generous of those 4 plans that I mentioned. So that is, one of those reasons why, it would be a good idea to go to the loan repayment calculator tool and figure out if it's more affordable for you to remain on the standard plan or to enroll in the income contingent plan, because that is the only plan that's currently available to Parent Plus borrowers. This is a point of advocacy that we're continuing to work on, but just wanted to mention that. That's a good idea. Thank you.
Thanks, Amy. Someone asks, is the time spent in forbearance counted towards the PSLF 120 payments?
So right now we're on an administrative forbearance. That is what the payment pause is technically coded under. So all of that time counts, that 3.5 years. Typically, forbearances do not count under public service loan forgiveness. You usually have to be making a payment and be in repayment status to get PSLF credit. However, because of the IDR account adjustment that I mentioned, some forbearances do count. So up to 12 consecutive months of forbearance, over 36 cumulative months of forbearance, or if you think that you were steered into forbearance, you're able to kind of raise your hand, file a complaint with the federal student aid ombudsperson, and see if you can get that time in forbearance to count as well. So it kind of depends, but right now is a great moment in time to try to get those forbearances to count.
And what about educational forbearance if you went back to school?
Right, so that's called an in-school deferment, and that time does not count towards PSLF. You would have to proactively take yourself out of in-school deferment to get to start making payments to get that time to count for PSLF.
Thanks, Amy. Another question asking about if you paid more than the necessary 120 payments for PSLF, and then through the IDR account adjustment, you then receive the forgiveness, are they going to automatically refund you any overpayments you've made?
I think it's the same answer to the previous one about refunds on over payments. So it matters if you've had a direct loan for this whole time. So if you've had a direct loan, then yes, I believe that you will be getting and be eligible for a refund. But if you had to consolidate, or you overpaid on one of those other loans, that would not count for a refund.
Thanks, Amy.
I think we should wrap up. Really want to thank Amy and Ella. Let's give them a round of applause. Any kind of gratitude over the emojis. You have to be one of the few people in the country who just have such in-depth knowledge of this stuff. It's so complicated. And I know we probably didn't get to every single question, but really appreciate, Ella sorting through the questions. Just so folks on the call know, we will be circulating the recording to registrants, and I believe the PowerPoint, Amy. So we'll follow up with you in a little bit on that. There is another link in the chat again to the Federal Register. This is the take action component to pay it forward to whether you're in the process of loan forgiveness or you will be forgiven. It's great to share your experience to policymakers. That's how they know how to make better policies. So again, I just want to thank Ella, Amy, my colleagues Steph and Lauren on the line for this wonderful event, and all the folks on the call. We need to hear from you. I just want to do one little plug for October 13th and 14th for TC Reunites. TC Reunites, and Lauren and Steph, maybe you could put a link in the chat to save the date, is going to be our big homecoming, our big reunion event. We'll focus on wellness, and we love to hear from you as constituents, faculty, staff, students, alumni, and friends of the college, and see you in the fall. So thank you again so much, and have a great day.